What would I have done differently for the Buffalo Bills than Brandon Beane in the 2024 NFL Draft? I'm sharing the picks I would have made today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. Very excited for a tradition like no other. I'm joined by Bruce Nolan, and him and I, this is going to be the fifth year in a row, we go toe-to-toe with Bills general manager Brandon Beane, and we take the opportunity to say who we would have picked in the 2024 NFL Draft. So that's what we're doing today. Bruce and I are going to give you our respective draft hauls for the Buffalo Bills. Bruce, as always, thanks for doing this with me, and thanks for being willing to go toe-to-toe with Brandon Beane in front of everybody. Welcome.
I say it this year. I say it every year. This is the ballsiest thing we do because overall the comments at the time of this recording, they're always at this point in the draft. You've kind of looked at your draft class. You started to kind of come around, even if you weren't huge fans of them before. You've started to take the copium. You've started to justify whatever you like. You started to watch the highlights. You've seen Keon Coleman talk about Macy's, and you're all the way in now. And so because of it, this is the worst possible time to do this type of thing, which is just awesome.
And that's why I say thank you. Thank you for being, I'm not doing this by myself. I'm taking you down with me, Bruce. So thanks for being here. And yes, that's exactly one of the points that I wanted to make right off the bat is no matter what you thought about the prospects before, now they are on your team. You've seen the highlights. You've seen the personality. You've bought in. And here we are to throw a massive, massive wrench in all of that. So that's what we're doing here today. In segment 2, Bruce is going to give you his entire draft class that he would have done instead of Brandon Beane. Segment 3, you're going to get mine. But I want to start by getting a few takes from Bruce about this draft class in general. I've not had a chance to speak to Bruce about this, so I'm very anxious to kind of get his overall thoughts. And so let's start there, Bruce, as you consider where the Buffalo Bills are in their life cycle and what Brandon Beane needed to accomplish in this draft. What are your general impressions on all of that and the direction of the team based on what this draft class tells you?
My overall impression from this draft class was that it was a little bit off recent brand. And I use those words very, very specifically. When I say off brand, I mean off recent brand, specifically with the picks of Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop, and Javon Solomon. I think those 3 picks are a little off brand for the Buffalo Bills. It kind of goes counter narrative. With Keon Coleman, you go size receiver. People who had concerns about his separation, they were like, nah, this is not the archetype that Brandon Beane has historically gotten. And when he says historically, they mean recently historically. Because in 2018, this was the Kelvin Benjamin and Andre Holmes show. And so it's not like it's completely outside of what Brandon Beane does. It's simply outside of what he's done recently. Cole Bishop coming to the draft. One of the narratives was Sean McDermott can make late drafted defensive backs work, right? He's the safety and corner whisperer. You look at all the defensive backs that the Buffalo Bills had at one point that weren't Trey White were late round picks. And so when you look at this, that's kind of off brand for Brandon Beane. It's counter narrative. You look at Javon Solomon. Brandon Beane admitted it himself. Hey, we think the 3-4 teams are going to like this guy a little bit more than they did. You know why? Because nobody thought that was going to be a Bills target. I didn't even actually watch Javon Solomon for more than like 4 seconds before the draft because I was like, oh, no, he's the 3-4 guy. They're not going to draft him. It doesn't matter. And so there I was live on WGR, and they say, Javon Solomon, Bruce, what do you think? And I went, you got to be kidding me. I haven't watched him. I'll get back to you in an hour. And that was what it was. And so because of this, that's also off brand for them. When the Buffalo Bills signed Von Miller, that was off brand because it's not historically the type of defensive end that they have favored. And so all of a sudden, in addition to those three, he trades back in the first round. This was a counter narrative draft for Brandon Beane. I think there's 4 specific pivot points that you can identify with the 3 draft picks and the trading down that make you go, you know what? Never say never. That's how I feel about the draft overall.
How much of that do you think is fueled by this team being a bit in transition and where you are at different points in your life cycles as a team? It dictates different decisions. And so we've seen Beane operate a certain way for so long. But the reality is there is transition, coaching, personnel, leadership. There's a lot of it. Do you think so much of him not doing the things we've typically seen him do lends itself to, okay, well, it's because of where this team is in its life cycle. And so therefore it demands different behaviors.
I think there's 2 factors to that. Number one, I think coordinator changes on both sides of the ball. I think that's a big part of it. I think you saw Joe Brady and openly admitted that Joe Brady was using Ken Dorsey's playbook last year and doing the best he could with it at the time. And now you have a different offensive coordinator than you had at the beginning of last year. You have a different defensive coordinator than you did last year. And so I think that's part of it. The other part of it is, you know what? If we're going to reset, let's just do different things than we did before, because that wasn't getting us over the hump. So it's not just doing the same things in younger bodies, right? It's not reset with the same skill set younger. It's reset with a different skill set. And one of the things that we talked about with Keon Coleman that I was on with Anthony Prohaska at Cover One is that we were talking about Keon Coleman and saying, well, you know, Josh Allen hasn't succeeded with this type of, you know, receiver in the past. And that's true, but he hasn't had to try since 2018.
Yeah.
Josh Allen's a different quarterback now. And so that's part of the whole, you know what, we're going to do things differently. And that can be a little scary because the Buffalo Bills have had unquestioned success for the last couple of years. They just haven't been able to get to the mountaintop. And so you're right there. You know what? This isn't working the way I want it to. We've had success, but we haven't been able to get that ultimate prize. Let's try something different.
Bruce, what's your favorite thing about this 2024 draft class?
My favorite thing is that he checked boxes positionally speaking. There weren't a lot of boxes as far as individual positional players that I wanted to get that he didn't get. I wanted to get a defensive tackle. He got one. Want to get a wide receiver. Got one. Want to get an interior offensive lineman? Got one. Want to get a punt returner? Got a punt returner. Want to get a safety? Got a safety. The methodology by which he went going and checking those boxes was different, as previously established, than we previously thought he might. But as far as those boxes that needed checked, positionally speaking, he pretty much checked them all.
You already used the phrase, the methodology by which, and it has me missing your podcast, Bruce. I know that you're right now, you're a podcast in transition as well. So Bruce obviously had a great run with Buffalo Rumblings with the Bruce exclusive podcast. And hopefully you'll have some news to share very soon so that fans like myself can continue listening to you on a regular basis. One more question before we get the Bruce Nolan draft haul. What's your top concern with this draft class?
It's verticality. One of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit when it came to wide receivers on the pod, and I never really got a chance to get there, is that it's not good enough to just have a fast guy on your roster. And I talked about this a little bit when it came to double dipping. And I did want to double dip in the draft when it came to wide receivers, but I didn't want to double dip with that second wide receiver being a really fast guy you picked in the 7th round. Because verticality only matters if you're actually on the field. The threat of explosive plays, the ability to be able to back up those safeties, it only matters if you're on the field. So if you have a really fast guy who you draft in the 7th round, who's inactive on game days, sorry, it's not helping your offense. That's just not the way it works. So for me, my concern is when you look at this wide receiver core in this tight end group and you think, okay, who are your threats down the field? Don't just give me 40 times. That's what people do. Oh, Khalil Shakir 40 time and Curtis Samuel 40 time. Curtis Samuel's ADOT has never been high in his career in the last couple of years. It's been trending in the wrong direction. And the last time he played with Joe Brady, we actually have stats of him in Joe Brady's system. It was like 7.5 was his ADOT. So could it happen? Sure. But it's completely reasonable for me to ask, is it going to? Because I haven't seen it happen. Khalil Shakir, the same thing. Is Khalil Shakir going to be a down the field vertical target? Well, that's not what he was last year. So, I mean, he could be, but again, that's projection. Keon Coleman doesn't overly project as that type of person. So when you look at this and you say, okay, how are you going to keep safeties off? How are you going to back them up just a little bit? Because we already know the Buffalo Bills are going to see a lot of too high. They've always seen a lot of too high ever since 2020 when Josh Allen announced to the world, hey, I'm an elite quarterback and I'm here to mess up your defenses. They've seen a lot of too high. How can I keep this offense from being compressed? If you want to run the ball, that's great. Got to keep guys out of the box. Got to keep the safeties back. I know that Josh Allen and his presence is going to make it so you really can't stack the box overly against Josh Allen, but who's going to keep the safeties back? That is my concern. Verticality from this offense is something that I was looking to achieve with that first or second wide receiver pick, and we just didn't really get it.
Well, we're going to find out if you found some verticality for the offense here in just a moment, as Bruce will debut his selections for the Bills in the 2024 NFL Draft. So be sure to stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Bruce, it's time. What I'd love for you to do is debut your picks, and then I will certainly follow up with some questions. We'll talk through it. A couple of housekeeping items here. We assume the same traits, right? So we're going to pick at the same spots that Brandon Beane did. We also recognize the advantage that we have of hindsight, and we know how the draft plays out. And of course, Brandon Beane didn't have that advantage. But he also has the advantage of meeting these human beings, right? And getting an entire staff of people working on him for years before he makes a selection. So I think there's enough offset there to make this relatively fair. And so without further ado, Bruce, your 2024 Bills draft haul.
With the 33rd overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, Bruce Nolan selected Ladd McConkey, wide receiver, Georgia. Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell were right next to me on the board. They were right next to me. I had concerns that popped up late in the process about Ladd McConkey's health, but ultimately went with McConkey. I want to make a statement about ball winners right now, because that's been a phrase that's been thrown around a little bit. And I want to throw out the same, maybe a disruptive phrase that I did when I said that when it comes to my safeties, someone being a downhill thumper and being a hard hitter really isn't that important to me. When it comes to ball winners and contested catch players, I think it's drastically overrated as a skill. And I'll tell you why. A 52% contested catch rate is good. A 52% catch rate is terrible. Every contested opportunity that you get as a wide receiver, even if your skills in that area are elite, pulls your catch rate down toward being bad. I want to avoid contested catch opportunities at all costs, because even if you're elite at them, if you're 52% contested catch, you're a good contested catch player, that's still terrible catch rate. One of the things we've been talking about with Stefon Diggs over the last section of 2024 was how poor his catch rate was, and how he didn't outproduce Khalil Shakir, even though he got 50 plus more targets down the stretch than Khalil Shakir did, because his catch rate was terrible. And we go, no. These things are tied together. I'd much rather have somebody who separates than somebody who's quote unquote a ball winner. Ladd McConkey separates. And in the event that they were concerned about verticality, I dealt with that on the back end. But ultimately, I think route pacing, I think the ability to present yourself open to the quarterback, I think hands, I think nuance, I think all the things where you can move him around, put him in different spots. I don't think he's a slot-only player. I think there's positive reps against press, against Senior Bowl. I think that there's something to Ladd McConkey. I wish he would not have gone to the Chargers and Greg Roman because the passing concepts and Greg Roman's offense are suboptimal for ideal wide receiver usage. And I think that you're not going to probably see the best of Ladd McConkey in Los Angeles, but I think you could have seen the best of him in Buffalo.
All right, so there's pick 33. I'm writing down questions as we go here, so go ahead and work through the next few picks, and we'll get to my rebuttals here.
At pick 60, I'm going chalk. We're sticking with Cole Bishop. This is going to be a really, really easy one. I think Cole Bishop translates pretty well to the Buffalo Bills defense. I think he has a very Jordan Poyer in him. I think that there was an opportunity here to take like Adrian Taylor Demerson if you wanted somebody who was a little bit more rangy. But ultimately, I think that there's something in Cole Bishop where the biggest weakness is something that I don't think he'll be exposed to often in the Buffalo Bills defense. I actually think that in a vacuum, so one of the difference between doing a big board and doing a Bills specific big board is you know what systems they're going to be in. And Cole Bishop in this system, I like a lot because you're not going to be asking him to do the thing I think he's weakest at, which is put him in single high and say, okay, your hips could go either direction here, dude. Figure it out. Hope you don't get burned by a vertical. Like, you're not going to ask him to do that very often. And because of that, and because of your ability to generate explosive plays on defense, which is what the name of the game is in defense nowadays, you're not going to sit there and hold an offense down. You have to make explosive plays. You have to come downhill, get tackles for loss, get sacks, jar the ball loose. You got to do what you got to do to be able to get them behind schedule. Cole Bishop fits the bill, pun intended. Pick number 95. This is where I get to cheat because I get to pick Ladd McConkey at 33, knowing full well who I get to take at 95. It's a benefit that I have that Brandon Beane doesn't have. It's Troy Franklin. You want verticality? You got verticality. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with Troy Franklin was the gap perceived between him and Xavier Worthy. And I think part of the gap is because of a 0.2 difference in their 40-yard dash time. Before too long, the 40-yard dash is going to be completely irrelevant in college football scouting due to the presence of the ability to track speed in real time on the football field. Worthy, 22.7 miles per hour. Best in the class. Crazy fast. Franklin, 22.3 miles an hour. Second best in the class. 0.2 difference in the 40. When it actually matters and you have to run like on the field with your pads on, he's just as fast as Xavier Worthy was. And I think he profiles better from an analytics standpoint. I mean, for goodness sake, Troy Franklin plus 25.6 in career yards per target over expectation. I mean, this is a guy who had multiple seasons with better than 2.3 yards per route run, which is just not common. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Troy Franklin, Brock Bowers, like that's basically it. So for me, the analytics profile is good. He fits what you needed to fit. He can play the X. I know people think he's a slot because of his frame, and I'm begging you to reclassify what we think an X is because I like the release package. I think he can do those things. I think you can put him out there and say, Troy Franklin, go get me a bucket. And he can do that. Ultimately, I think the combination of Ladd McConkey and Troy Franklin give you a well-rounded wide receiver group that can do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways while still retaining the ability to separate, which is the most important part of being a wide receiver in the National Football League.
So Bruce comes out of day 2 with Ladd McConkey, Cole Bishop, and Troy Franklin. So one chalk pick, 2 different ones. And I want to give you a second to catch your breath there. We're now entering day 3, 4th round. What do you got?
95 overall. I took Troy Franklin. And then 130, I'm going to get somebody to battle against him in practice. I'm taking TJ Tampa. I had no idea he was going to fall where he fell. Now, I knew that the athletic testing wasn't good. Like, that part I knew. But I didn't think it was going to override the tape that much. Ultimately, I think that the Buffalo Bills have kind of uncovered something in their system with a player like Rasul Douglas. One of the things I mentioned in my write-up before the NFL draft about Cole Bishop was that Cole Bishop had a little Rasul Douglas-y safety-ish in him. And the Bills may have be onto something here when it comes to that style of player. One of the players that TJ Tampa got comped to in the lead up to this draft was, you guessed it, Rasul Douglas. Long arms, physical cornerback, aggressive, does what he has to do. Yeah, he's a little upright. Yeah, he's not super smooth, but you're going to be in a primarily zone system, and you're going to have him playing forward a lot of the time. I think that he's instinctive. I think he's aggressive. And again, the name of the game on defense is generating explosive negative plays. And I just took Cole Bishop and TJ Tampa that allows me to do that. In addition, if you decide you want to play more press, which has been rumored, and you say, you know what, we're going to do that to help Kaiir Elam transition a little bit and maybe speed up his development, you've got someone else who can do that too. So TJ Tampa, cornerback, Iowa State, is my pick at 130. At 141, I'm going chalk again. We're going VPG. Van Pran-Granger, baby. And I'm going to make that happen, by the way. VPG is going to be a thing. Like it's going to be a thing. It's going to be like Fetch, except it's totally going to take off. And for me, this is a Mitch Morsian sort of player, right? Same height, similar build, shorter arms, but good on the move. I think you like to see centers. I think we take for granted that centers can make contact on the move because we've seen it happen in Buffalo for so long now. We just see Mitch Morse do this stuff on pin and pull. We go, oh yeah, that's normal stuff. It's not normal stuff. There's plenty of people who have offense that can't run this type of stuff because they don't have a center who can move and consistently connect with moving targets the way that Mitch Morse could. And now you go straight from Mitch Morse and you go right to VPG and you're like, yeah, okay, this is the kind of player. And the Buffalo Bills went right from him, and they have Connor McGovern in the middle now. Connor McGovern can do that. So the Buffalo Bills fans are getting incredibly spoiled by having centers who can play on the move. And it's not just like he's going to get like beaten up in the pass game. I mean, the guy allowed 1 sack in his college football career, and he'll fight you in a phone booth, man. The effort level of VPG, even when he loses the initial punch, right? He'll just keep fighting you like a Wolverine, right? And I don't mean that as a Michigan way. This is, or like a bulldog. Let's just go ahead and do that, right? My experience with bulldogs has been overly more positive, so I tend to think of them a little bit more, cute and cuddly than I do vicious and mean and scrappy. But I'm going with VPG here. I'm keeping them. I'm saying, hey, if Connor McGovern works out center, great. But if not, I feel really good about the ability to be, potentially succession plan to succession plan set up here. I think it's an absolute windfall to be able to go from Mitch Morse to Connor McGovern to potentially, if David Edwards doesn't show out at left guard and you have the ability to move Connor McGovern back and just plug in VPG and be good with it, what an embarrassment of riches for a team that had really good and untested offensive line depth in 2024 because of the injuries just didn't happen. And then all of a sudden, in the span of about 2 days, they lost a lot of that, and it was very upsetting for me. So it's nice to get it back with VPG.
Spoiler, one of my big disappointments in my draft is that I don't have VPG, which kills me, but we'll get to that in a moment. Keep going here. You got 160, 168 here in the 5th round.
Pick number 160. We are going with one of my favorite players in the entire draft, and you will be shocked to hear that it's a running back. I'm taking Tyrone Tracy here from Purdue. And Tyrone Tracy, I literally just picked him in our Dynasty Fantasy Football League like 2 hours ago. And I was sitting there going, do I want to, do I want, and I was hemming and hawing, and I was like, you know what? I enjoyed watching his tape more than almost any player this entire draft. Ultimately, a lot of my biases, I've mentioned this before, come from the fact that if I have fun watching you, I'm like, you get fun points for me. Like, they're not listed on the scouting report, but subconsciously, let's be honest, they're there, right? The fun points are there. Tyrone Tracy is one of those players that I think if he would have converted to running back a season and a half or so earlier, you would have been a day 2 pick, because the running back tape in 1 year of Tyrone Tracy, converted wide receiver. He was a wide receiver at Iowa. He became a running back at Purdue. And it was legitimately good, Joe. Like this is not an Antonio Gibson. Hey, we hope he projects, but I don't know if he's tough enough. I don't know if he has the inside vision. I don't know if he's willing to put his foot in the ground and actually make a cut and go downhill. It's not like that. I watched it and I thought this guy had been playing running back his whole life. Like, it was really impressive stuff. His athletic profile is fantastic. The analytical profile is amazing. He was top 10, top 15 in the country in almost every single major predictive metric when it comes to running backs, as far as percentage of runs that contained a broken tackle, right? Yards after contact per attempt, all the things that you think translate, because they're more of the things that the running back's forced to do themselves and they're not forced upon them by situation. One of the discussions that you had about James Cook is yards before contact and yards after contact per carry. Tyrone Tracy did not get a lot of help from Purdue in yards before contact per carry, but he did a lot with it at the end. And I think he's one of those players that, because he's old, right? And I just went from an old running back with Ray Davis to an old running back with Tyrone Tracy, because he's old and because he's got 1 year of carries. That's the reason why he's here. Because if he was 22 and had 2 years of this, I think he's a day 2 pick. So I'm willing to swing on a player like that, especially on day 3 of the draft. It's Tyrone Tracy for me coming out of Purdue.
All right. Fun pick. Let's keep it going. 168.
So at 168, you might have realized that I let something go. I had a position that fell through the cracks here, a position that I said that I wanted to draft. And I was excited that Brandon Beane
I didn't forget, Bruce. I didn't forget.
It's defensive tackle.
Thank you. Yes.
And I took a defensive tackle. I took Mekhi Wingo. So I wanted a player that I felt strongly about playing 3-tech specifically. And I think he profiles to that. I mean, 6 foot, 284 pounds. I think he's a perfect kind of player to come in behind Ed Oliver. I think that it was the right spot. I love the motor, right? Motor is important to me in defensive tackles, because I feel like it's one of those situations where if your motor lets up for 1 or 2 plays, big plays happen against you. And it's the same as being out of control. I'd rather you be high motor and out of control, a la the defensive tackle the Buffalo Bills did draft in Dewayne Carter, versus I'm out of gas and now I'm stuck on the field because the offense went hurry up and I got stuck in a bad personnel package and now we're just going to get gashed. That's what I see. And that's not what you see from Wingo. I think you have a good athlete. I think you have the right system for him. Ultimately, I think that if he hadn't gotten injured, I think you would probably have a little bit higher grade on him. So for me, it's Mekhi Wingo, LSU defensive tackle.
All right, just the 6th and 7th rounds left to go. I'm excited to see how you close it out.
The next 2 picks I'm going to speak about as a package because they're both chalk. Tylan Grable and Hardy are both sticking around for me. And I'll tell you why. This is what you should do late in the draft. This is Bruce's preferred strategy late in the draft. And I was really excited when Brandon Beane went ahead and did this. You should take absolute freaks late in the draft, like Grable. And you should take players who fulfill very, very, very niche roles for you, like punt returner. Those are the things you should be taking in the 7th round. Some of these people, you take them in the 7th round, you go, you're calling dibs in the 7th round. That's what you're doing. You're calling dibs on players who could go either way. They could be draftable. They could be UDFA, priority undrafted free agents. You're calling dibs. And you're saying you want to call dibs on that guy? Like, if you're going to call dibs on the crazy freak. If you're at recess and you're picking somebody and you're trying to, pick the players you think are going to give you the best chance to win, you call dibs on the biggest, strongest, fastest guy. That's what you do. You don't call dibs on that guy who might play special teams for you that one time, I sure hope. And so for me, it's the right strategy to go about drafting in the 7th round, right? I think that Aaron Kromer is going to absolutely love having Grable in his building, because you look at the development of Alec Anderson, you look at the development of the Bills swing tackle, Ryan Vandermark, and you think, okay, Cromer's doing some stuff here. Let's give him another athlete. Let's give him another freak. With Daequan Hardy, I have concerns about the Bills' backup nickel. I've always had concerns about the Bills' backup nickel, considering how incredibly important it is. And every single time I have the best nickel corner in football, in Taron Johnson, get hurt and Cam Lewis rolls in or somebody else rolls in, I go, it's just not the same, man. So if I can kill two birds with one stone, I can get a absolute dog at nickel who I think fits the system and the aggressiveness that you need from that position in this defense. You need to be a linebacker who's just shaped like a defensive back. And you need a punt returner. You got both of them with Daequan Hardy. So I'm sticking completely chalk at 204 and 219.
Last pick is at 221. Close us out.
221. I am going to take a defensive end. And I'm going to take a defensive end who kind of reminds you of the defensive end that you already had. And I'm going to take Jalen Harrell. I'm going to take Jalen Harrell from Michigan. I actually kind of fell into a bad habit of taking Jalen Harrell in the 5th or 6th of a lot of my PFF mock drafts coming into the league and the draft. And I was like, I'm falling into a bad habit. I got to stop doing this. But every single time I was like, okay, 6'4", 250, like good wingspan, like coach this guy up. He comes from a good coach defense. I'm like, okay, like I'm interested. He's got tools. And so I think that there's a long arm there. I think there's a spin there that you like. And I think, okay, I'm going to take somebody toolsy. And if it flops, it flops. But ultimately, pedigree, physical skills, there's some stuff that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. I think specifically anchor, but you're running into that with the guy that you picked anyway. The ability to get swallowed up. But at least you have more impressive physical gifts from Jalen Harrell than you have from Javon Solomon, who, by the way, after I looked at for a while, I actually walked away really liking Javon Solomon. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is fun. I do think a 3-4 team should have been more interested, but it is what it is. So that's my picks. Those are all the rounds. That's where I'm at. And I guess we'll see how I did.
Yes, we will. Of course, we'll compare. Nobody's right or wrong today. That's the best part about the NFL draft is it deserves time to play out. I like what you did here. I'm going to have one follow-up question for you, which I'll tell you what it is right now, and we'll get the answer on the other side of a quick word from Monopoly. My question is going to be something that I think a lot of people are thinking. We like what you did, but you didn't give us any size at wide receiver. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. And then also on the other side of it, you're going to get my picks that I would have made instead of Brandon Beane. So be sure to stick with us. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for bigger prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or you heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. There's simply always something new and fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, Bruce, you did a great job of kind of like explaining your picks and your thought process behind it. But the one thing I did want to come back with is, all right, you got the verticality, you got the route running, no size. I think I know how you're going to answer this, but I want to give you the opportunity to say it.
Size in a vacuum is not important to me. Size is important because of the other things that it used derived from it. So I care about size because I want you to be able to get off press. But if you can get off press with a release, I don't care. I care about size because I'd like you to be able to win contested catches if necessary. But ideally, I'd like you to not be in contested catches. Size is also vastly overrated in the red zone. That's one of the things that really, to be honest, that narrative should have died 15 years ago, but we're hanging on to it from the 1990s. This idea that, he's going to be a weapon in the red zone because he's 6'4". Like that That stopped being true a long time ago. It's a football myth. Ultimately, separation becomes more important in the red zone because the space is limited. And so size matters to me because of what it gives you. On its own, in a vacuum, I don't care that much. And I can get those other things without needing the size. If I get the size and it gives me the ability to do that stuff, awesome. That's great. It's a nice little cherry on top. I got some size. That's fantastic. But I never go into the situation saying, you know what I need? Size. I only need it if it gives me any of the traits I just mentioned, but I may be able to get it without needing size.
Yeah, the size and separation players are the ones you really want to get, right?
Ideally, I'd like to have my cake and eat it too.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's only so many of those, and they go in the top 10. So there's that. All right, here's my haul. Real quick on Bruce's haul. If I recap it correctly, Ladd McConkey at 33, Cole Bishop, safety Utah at 60, Troy Franklin, wide receiver Oregon at 95, TJ Tampa, the corner out of Iowa State at 128, Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, the center from Georgia at 141, Tyrone Tracy, running back at 160, at 168, Mekhi Wingo, defensive tackle LSU, 204, Tylan Grable, tackle, offensive tackle UCF at 219, Daequan Hardy, the corner out of Penn State, and then lastly 221, Jalen Harrell, defensive end out of Michigan. Here's what I got, Bruce. Here we go. At 33, I'm not picking Keon Coleman. I'm picking Cooper DeJean, the safety out of Iowa. And this is what I'll say. What good is having a draft board if you're not going to use it? I went through, I graded all the players, I stacked them, and Cooper DeJean was my number 11 player on the board. So you better believe if he's on the board at 33, it has to be my choice. And obviously that sets forth a completely different trajectory for this entire draft because they get the safety at 33, and certainly the receiver landscape changes quite a bit. But I the player I watched in Cooper DeJean is one that I couldn't turn down at 33. At 60, I'm going with wide receiver Roman Wilson out of Michigan. He went number 84 overall to the Steelers. Gives me speed, right? 4.3 speed, can win inside, outside, good route runner, unbelievable hands, body control. I think he's the type of person that the organization would love, and he gives me a separation guy that is versatile by alignment and where he can win on the field. At pick 95, I go with another wide receiver, so I go double dip here real quick. We get Javon Baker out of UCF, who went 110, I believe, to the Patriots. And there's the vertical element that you were talking about. You know, Javon Baker, a guy that averaged a ton of yards per catch, but it's his ability to stack corners, get on top of them, and win down the field that works. And that's actually the type of vertical threat that we've seen work with Josh Allen. And so, again, the benefit of hindsight is helpful here, where I know that I could pick Cooper DeJean at 33, come back and get a couple of receivers that I like at 60 and 95. At 128 in the fourth round, this is the same pick that you made. Cornerback TJ Tampa out of Iowa State had a second-round grade on him. And at this point, it's just I had to pull the trigger. I think he's an ideal scheme fit for the Buffalo Bills. I'm trying to figure out why he slid. Maybe it's because he ran a little slow and he didn't go to the Senior Bowl. I don't know. But watch the tape. He's a very clean projection to the Buffalo Bills, who, I mean, honestly, I'm surprised right now that their outside corner situation is what it is, because as things currently stand, Jamarcus Ingram's got a pretty clear path to making this roster as a CB4. I think you can certainly elevate that with a guy like TJ Tampa, who projects to me as a starter in time. Pick 141. This is one of my guys in the draft, Austin Booker, the edge rusher out of Kansas. This is actually a player that the Bears traded a pick with. I think they traded a 3 or a 4 in the 2025 draft to come back into this draft to get him. I just love him. And what's funny is I loved him, and then I watched another game because I wanted to watch Tylan Grable after the Bills drafted him. So I watched UCF versus Kansas, and there's my guy, Austin Booker, just giving Grable all the fits in the world, man. He's so slippery. Like, he just gets off blocks at a level that you just don't expect. And he's so new to, he's kind of raw. He's really not started much, not really played a lot of snaps, but what he put on tape is really good and something that I couldn't pass up on, even if it meant I don't get my guy, Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. At 160, here's another carryover pick from you and I. I went with Mekhi Wingo, the defensive tackle out of LSU, who went 189, I think, to the Detroit Lions. And Wingo, I just think he's got a stumpy build, and that's what's getting in the way of him getting drafted a little bit higher. The guy can play football. I thought he was the best of the LSU defensive tackles, and Jefferson and Mason Smith. I thought he was clearly the best one, and he was the third one drafted, which surprised me, but not in my draft. That didn't happen. So we went ahead, pulled the trigger. We get a guy that has athleticism, penetration skills, can rush the passer. Really happy with that. At 168, we're going to get our running back, Kamani Vidal, out of Troy. Think about the same dense build that everyone's excited about with Ray Davis, winning through contact, short yardage, also can catch the football, can also pass block. So really checks the boxes that I was looking for out of a running back to add to this mix. Then I picked 204. I went with Bo Limmer, the interior offensive lineman out of Arkansas. This makes me feel better about not getting VPG because I think a lot of Bo Limmer. I had a 4th-round grade on him. I think he's a developmental starter that gives you all the same dynamics that gets us excited about Sedrick Van Pran-Granger. At pick 219 in the 6th round, I continued with Daequan Hardy, the corner out of Penn State as well. This is one of my favorite picks that the Bills made, not only because I think he's reasonably a good slot player. Like, I thought he has good tape in the slot. I was very surprised that he didn't get drafted a little bit higher. But also the punt return ability that he provides with 4.3 speed, 2 punt return touchdowns, no muffs, plenty of yards per return in his first season doing it. And he had a big time impact as a returner in high school. So I think it's a great pick at 219 and one that I'm pretty optimistic about for the Buffalo Bills. Then at pick 221, here's my big dart throw. Jaheim Bell. I'm not sure how familiar you are with him. Tight end out of Florida State. He bounced around a little bit. I think he went to Alabama, Texas, and then eventually gets to Florida State. Maybe he was at South Carolina as well. He was at a lot of different places. But when you watch him play, there's just a natural athleticism about him. And for a tight end, he's been used as a kick returner. He's been used as a running back. He's been used to catch passes, wins after the catch. Like, I'm pretty sad that the Patriots got him, to be honest with you, because I think he's one of those X-factor weapons that is just a type of guy that you'd love to have around. So I thought he was a fun, just miscellaneous, positionless player that we can see if we can find a role for on our team at pick 221. So there you have it, Bruce. What do you think? I mean, does that look like a Joe Marino draft class? Any questions on it?
I have a comment, and that is everyone in the comment section is going to like yours better than mine. And I just want to let you know that I already hate you for it. Just if this was a popularity contest, you would absolutely obliterate me in this thing.
You got Ladd McConkey. People are in on Ladd McConkey. And I
got Javon Baker and Roman Wilson. I already had the question written out after you had Roman Wilson. I was going to ask, how do you feel about your wide receiver that you picked having single-digit targets from the outside over the course of his career and the Bills needing an X? And then you came back and took Javon Baker. I just threw my hands up in the air here silently and went, oh, well, there he goes. Joe's just going to win the game again. It's like playing Madden against your bigger brother when you're young and just going like, no matter what I do, he's just toying with me because I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just pressing random buttons. That's how it felt there for me.
You had a chance. You had a chance to do the same thing. I mean, I'm trying to think where I think people are going to like your Ladd McConkey pick a lot. I think they're going to like that you stuck with Cole Bishop. I think people might say that they like your combination better than mine.
Let me ask you one thing.
Yeah.
How do you feel about coming out of this and not getting a tackle? Because that's one of the big differences between yours and mine is that I got a tackle, developmental tackle. I know the Buffalo Bills, like Vandemark, but Spencer Brown coming in for the last year of his deal. You want to see probably what you got. You want to probably stock up assets behind him. Did you give thought at all to a tackle somewhere in the late rounds or maybe even earlier that you thought, hey, we want to hedge against the possibility that, starting right tackles now. You look at Austin Jackson signing with the Miami Dolphins. You think, okay, there's a target for Spencer Brown next year. Maybe I don't want to pay that. I want to have somebody in the wings. What were your thoughts on tackle as you were going through the exercise?
I thought is that I wanted to get one. It never made a lot of sense to me. I thought about forcing one just to do it at 221, but I just like Jaheim Bell better. And candidly, I think Tylan Grable's got a big uphill climb ahead of him to make this roster. I think Ryan Vandemark clearly is the leading candidate to be the swing. I think they're going to look at Lyle Collins' depth at right tackle. And I'm not going to pound the table for Tommy Doyle, but he still exists. I don't think Tylan Grable is going to make this roster. And so that made me feel better about, okay, let's see what we can get in undrafted free agency. Who's that guy from Wisconsin that everyone's, or not from Wyoming that everyone's excited about? Get somebody like that instead of, I rather have Jaheim Bell. That's what it came down to. And it was something I wish I could have addressed, but didn't feel like forcing it.
Fair enough.
So there you have it. Joe Marino, Bruce Nolan, head-to-head with Brandon Beane. Of course, we want to hear from you. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment. You can also Find Bruce and I on X. Bruce is at Bruce Exclusive. I'm at the Joe Marino. Let us know what you think. Be kind. We're Bills fans, so we're rooting for the draft class that Brandon Beane assembled. But, if you take the time to study all these players and do the work that we do, sometimes it's fun to consider, all right, if you had the opportunity to make the picks, here's what we would do. Also, everyone, at some point, be sure to stay tuned for an announcement on what Bruce Nolan is doing with his podcasting future. And of course, whenever that is made known, we'll let you know here on this podcast because we want to support Bruce. He's been a great friend of this podcast and somebody that I always enjoy not only having on as a guest, but listening to his work every opportunity that I can. So Bruce, thanks again for coming on with me.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.